are the subtle energy channels of the yogic system related to those of the Chinese Meridian system? Well, they're not exactly the same if you look at the diagrams, and I've drawn out some of them here. But they are definitely related. How are they related? They're coming from direct experience in the human body. So they weren't discovered in a book, they were discovered inside the body. People concentrated and felt the energy moving, subtle sensations. That requires a lot of concentration, still stable mind. And people perceived it in different ways. So what I've drawn out here are some of the nadis, actually the three main nadis, which are the central channel, and that one goes from around the pelvic floor up into the between the eyebrows. And then the sun channel, which is on the right, represents a sort of a yang energy, and that one starts also in the same pelvic floor region and into the right nostril. And then the moon channel is on the left, and that represents the yin energy, and that one ends on the left nostril. So there are a lot of other nadis, maybe 72,000. There's different numbers indicated, but it just means a lot. There's a lot of these subtle energy channels, and of all of them, these are the three most important, and certainly the central channel in the yogic system and the practices that we're doing is clearly the most important one, the only one that really matters. And that's what's talked about in the Hatha Pradipika text. I'll talk about that in a moment. In the meridian system, there are 12 regular meridians, but actually they have different branches, so it's really more than that. And then there are 8 more, what's called extraordinary vessels or extraordinary meridians, and they have a sort of a deeper energy that's more like serves as a reservoir of energy. It's there before you're born. So there's a whole bunch of the regular ones here, which I have in green, maybe analogous to the 72,000. I know it's not the same number. And then on the right here, I've drawn out the three most important of the extraordinary channels or meridians. And those are again yin, yang, and a central channel. So in that way, it's very similar to the Nadi system when we're talking about spiritual practice. So in the spiritual practices, which have to do with the development of awareness or consciousness, maybe something beyond that, there are these three. In Chinese medicine, there are these spiritual practices, of course, related to that lineage as well. Meditative practices, energy moving practices. And so the moon channel, what corresponds to that in the Chinese system is actually on the front of the body. Instead of the left side of the body, it's the front. And then in the sun channel, which is on the right side here, is the back of the body. It's one single line straight up the back of the body. And that's the yang channel. These are called Ren and Du. And they also start in the pelvic floor, all three of them, and end somewhere near the nose anyway. So it's similar, not exactly the same. Very interesting. Central channel goes up through the spinal cord, but also up the front of the body, into the face, down into the foot. So not quite the same, but very similar. And we have to keep coming back to the actual experience of what it is. In the Hatha Pradipika text is very interesting because it brings together some of the physical practices and talks about how they relate to the practices described, or the goal described in the Yoga Sutras, which is also known as Raja Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, culminating in samadhi, but really liberation or kaivalya. So the chapters in the Hatha Pradipika are the first one on asana, and those are the physical exercises or postures, and it talks about how they can cure diseases and strengthen the body, but it also talks about some of the more subtle effects, which are, again, moving energy with prana in this system, chi in that system. It's the same thing, right? And there are 15 asanas. We practice all 15 of these asanas, at least our version of them, in the Hatha Pradipika posture sequence. It's a variation of the master class, if you're familiar with that. So we do practice all 15 of those. The second chapter is on pranayama. And the real theme of this, it talks about the channels, these channels, in this chapter. It talks about prana and chitta. That means how the subtle energy in the body is related to the mind. They are very related, they move together. So when the prana is moving, the chitta is moving. Chitta is just the mind. So your thoughts, your mental processes are related to the breath. Pranayama is the breath, but it's also the energy moving through all these channels, which is not air, right? Breath is air, but also movement of energy. In the pranayama chapter, it also recommends doing purification techniques, but only when needed. And the main one that we practice, which I think is good for everyone at all times, there's a few exceptions to that, is Nali Kriya, and that's really just a gentle abdominal massage that you're doing with your abdominal muscles and bandha. The third chapter is on mudra and bandha, so we're getting step by step more and more subtle, more and more internal, and this is where we use some physical practices combined with internal practices or mental techniques to create even more profound shifts in consciousness. And here's some of the mudras that we practice: Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, Mulabandha, Jaladhara Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, Shambhavi Mudra, which is focusing there between the eyebrows, and the tongue lock. The last chapter is called Samadhi. It talks also about Laya. This is the dissolution of the mind. These are things that you can't really describe in words. It's kind of useless to talk about them, in fact, but the practices lead you to them. And another one of these practices is called nada, and that is simply listening to the subtle internal sound in the right ear, supposedly. And that might be the sound of energy in the central channel. So you imagine your mind has to be very still and quiet in order to perceive something so subtle, but it's very possible. Through this, according to the Yoga Sutras, we receive a special kind of insight or knowledge. Could be direct perception, something that words cannot describe or ever transmit. So we can experience it only. No one can tell you about it, and you can't tell anyone about it either, but it has a profound effect in your spiritual journey. So thank you for listening. Isn't it interesting how this practice can both heal the body in a physical sense, cure diseases, at least, except maybe old age, and also serve as a way to develop connection to your innermost self and to the divine. Don't forget, surrender and devotion to God are always there. Very important. Thank you.